Okay, well, good morning. Today is February 1st, 2015. We're starting Esther. So today's is titled Introduction to Esther. Going to lay the floor out for the book and jump into some of the pieces that are here. So start out with Esther 1, chapter 1, verse 1. Amy had read for us previously that this is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. So this particular book, Esther, is going to take place near the end, perhaps at the end of the Babylonian exile. What we're going to see is that if you were to put the pieces together from a year perspective, Nehemiah has already rebuilt the wall. And so we just finished up preaching, obviously, through Isaiah. We talked about the Babylonian exile and those who've gone over. And so this is now kind of returning to that time period. It's right after it. And some of the people who were in exile, some of those families, did not come back. They stayed in there. They had established, I think you kind of imagine this, they had been there for years and years and years, generations. And so there was an opportunity to return to Israel. Some did. Some went with Nehemiah. Some stayed. And so Esther is one of those families that stayed. And she's over there in the lands around Babylon. And we'll talk kind of what happens. So this person, Xerxes, if you were to try and picture him, there are some modern adaptations that include Xerxes in a few various pieces. If anybody recognizes either of those pictures there, the one on top is a modern adaptation of the kind of the love story, if you will. And Paul, I'm going to guess you probably recognize Xerxes in the bottom one. What movie is that one from? Do you recognize him all dooled up like that? That's a popular guy film. I believe that's from 300, if I remember correctly. So two different modern versions of him, if you will. And you could kind of get the idea, depending on what part of the story they're trying to tell. Xerxes as the warrior, and seen as a warrior god, actually, among his people, or more as the love story. And Amy's looking. Yep, that's 300. Okay, yeah. So that's the Xerxes we're talking about here. Okay, and so interesting to sort of get some pieces. And at that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. So this is kind of like you went down to the capital city. Some of you visited, perhaps, Washington, D.C., and there are various times we put things out on display. So some things are on display at the National Archives all the time, like the Declaration of Independence, for example, and the Constitution. We use certain venues, like, for example, the Smithsonian, which is our national museum, to be able to display certain things. They come in rotation. We have a display for a time. Or we'll have something, for example, in the Capitol building over in the Rotunda. For the next 3 months, you can come and see the fill-in-the-blank display to go in through to that. And so with that, if you kind of follow, this is what he's doing. He's declaring that, he's now been in control now for 3 years. And he's displaying how powerful he is and how powerful the nation is, the empire is. Because you might recall when I talked about him back during Isaiah, Xerxes the Great was the first one to have the designation of, well, the Great. The Persians, if you will, invented the idea of empire. Okay, they were the ones that did it right, quote unquote, the first time, at least in our tradition. There are some Chinese empires that are occurring during earlier time periods or similar time periods, but they're sort of separated in the mind space that they didn't enter in to the European mental kind of history, if you will. So from a European perspective, this is the first major one that's there. So what does that look like? Well, just as a quick one, you get an idea there. You can see this is comes all the way over on the one side. Oh, it's today. There is a football game today, I was told, right? Isn't there a football game? Yep. All right. Boom. There it is. Okay. So here you go. So yeah. So if we go from, let's see if I can pick a better color than that. Let's do red. All right. So if we go, all right. So from this side over here to all the way over here, right? And it's telling me some people can't see it. So Amy, you may not be able to see the notes here. But the key part is from India all the way over to Egypt. This is the space that was the Persian Empire. For those of you that saw 300, that would, of course, be a battle right up in here, right? There you go. Red for Patriots, somebody's saying. And then his capital was in the area of Susa. And so that's actually right here. I'm noting right there if y'all can see that. And that would actually be right on the Iraq-Iran border in modern day world. Okay, so it's actually be inside Iran. Those borders didn't exist back then, but that would be just to give you an idea of about where that is. Kuwait would be just to the south of this, if some of you are familiar with that. Okay, So this is a huge empire, and this is what he ruled. And so from there, from his capital city, he puts on this banquet and this display. So, all right, so when the days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. So there are, all those who are here, his close trusted advisors and servants, get to come to the party, if you will. And the garden had hangings of white and blue linen fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. And they're telling you all these things to talk about how opulent and important it was. This is in modern day terms, a state dinner. Okay, this is a big dinner. This is a big deal. It lasted for 7 days. It's a big, not just a dinner. It's a huge multi-day feast, right? And they go on to tell some of the things here that Amy had read for us earlier, that there were couches of the various colors and some of the pieces here. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from another. That means that these goblets were handmade for, each one specifically, basically by an artist, as opposed to quote unquote being mass produced. And by that, I don't mean like an assembly line, but I mean they cranked out a bunch of things that look basically the same. Each one is probably hand engraved. And again, the point of the Bible telling us this is a big deal. This was a lot of money spent on it. This was important. Okay, that's why the Bible is telling you this stuff. So wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from another, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. So he's putting out all these things. And Paul does note that it is much greater than any Super Bowl celebration. You're absolutely correct. There you go. And yes, I won't go into it. Yes, we can say Super Bowl, and we don't have to say the big game. That's another topic. So you can't say Super Bowl. It's copyrighted. All right. So anyway, by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. So open bar, if you will. He's allowed to everybody. It's this is unusual. He's just lavishing out there. And oh, by the way, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. And on the 7th day, that this is the end of the whole thing, then King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. And those are names that Amy read very well earlier, and I won't try. And they ordered them to bring him to Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. And I bet Amy's typing a comment to me even as I speak. And there you go. All right. So, but when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Why did she do this? Why did she do this? I don't know. I don't know what, and it doesn't tell us. Maybe she really didn't like big events. She really didn't like being put on display. Maybe it was kind of a power struggle. You will be here at this place in this time, and I'm going to tell you to do it. And she's like, no, you can't make me, right? Or whatever. Maybe they had a fight the night before. I don't know. But for whatever reason, she got a direct commandment from the king, and she refuses it. So I think you understand that in this date and time, that it was. So Amy's got one theory. She always thought she was showing the women how important she was. I think that's a possible interpretation, Amy. I don't know that it says that, but this certainly, there's certainly some sort of power struggle going on here, or at least the king interpreted it as a power struggle. And so then the king became furious and burned with anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matter of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king, and it lists their names. The 7 nobles of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the command for King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memucan replied, in the presence of the king and nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed. Let me make a quick comment. If you're ever emperor and you're able to create a legal system underneath you, you should think twice about ever writing into law that if you make a law, you can't repeal the law. I'm just going to comment. I make typos sometimes. This occurs in Daniel, and it also occurs here. We believe this to be true, but wow, interesting legal system if you all follow the point. But they had some really interesting lobbying about some of those laws before they went into effect. I'm just saying, don't let the king sign it. No. All right. So the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is to never again enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. So this is an interesting aspect. So she ends up being told that she's never going to come into the king's presence again, and she's no longer going to be queen. On the one hand, this is a tremendous fall, if you will, from grace and favor, and a dramatic loss and perdition. On the other hand, Amy's talking about why it was that she was doing it. Another theory is she didn't want the job, right? She's like, I don't want this job anyway. I didn't want to be this, and you know what I'm saying? I don't want to be queen. She played a heck of a gamble. Would not have been uncommon for a king to kill a queen. For such a thing. Xerxes doesn't do that, but it was a heck of a gamble if that's what she was doing. But whatever the case, she did it, and he did it, and so let it be written, so let it be done. So verse 20, then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. I don't know that that's a true statement, but that's what they said. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, proclaiming in each people's tongue that every man should be ruler over his own household. There you go. So, number one, I only have two takeaways with this. This entire first chapter is primarily a setup for what's going to happen next. Some of you have perhaps heard the story. Esther's going to be queen. And so there's rumblings here that's about to happen where Queen Vashti is about to be taken down. As I prayed over this one, I thought I should comment on this one that God works in mysterious ways. He really, really does. He finds ways to be able to work in things and through things and by things that most of the rest of us would just not see as God being involved in. The book of Esther is interesting in that it's one of the few books in the Bible that doesn't directly reference God doing anything. You're not going to hear me say, then God did the following and so forth, and God came down from heaven. You're not going to see that. That's not part of the book of Esther. In fact, for that reason, Martin Luther really questioned whether Esther should be in the Bible at all. Okay? He was kind of like, I don't know about this one. Okay? There's two. By the way, he also had trouble with the book of James. Is an interesting comment. That's another whole topic. Has to do with what's called justification by faith. It's a whole Lutheran thing. But I digress. So Martin Luther is a fairly famous guy, pretty important in church history. Really struggled with Esther, but there's no question that Esther is absolutely included in all of the Jewish Bibles, what we would call Jewish canon. There's no question it was included. It's included in early Christian canon, and so it's definitely there. And yet we don't see God does exactly the following. So what's interesting is that the Jewish people teach Esther, they read Esther every year at a festival that we're going to talk about called Purim. And what's interesting is they teach it as an example of God working behind the scenes. That Esther is an example that even when you can't see God working, he is working, and he's working for his people. And I think that maybe they're onto something. I think that they have a good value here, and something that's worth commenting on. And so I think that's good to just be aware of. So number one is God works in mysterious ways. And number two, I would say related to that, is that we often cannot see him working, especially when he is, and this is the phrase that I chose for this sermon, that he's walking the land and preparing to till the soil. Now, I've preached several times, maybe too many times, on the analogy of broken soil, that when soil gets disturbed soil, when we do construction alongside of a road, all of a sudden seeds that have lain dormant there spring up that have been dormant for a long time. When we plow a field, the same thing happens. You can plow a field and then not plant a single seed, and all of a sudden there will be an explosion of growth that will come over that just by plowing it, okay? And I've commented that the same is true in our lives. When you turn over hard-packed dirt in your life, or when God turns it over, or life turns it over, that all of a sudden things that have lain dormant for a long, long time will spring up. Some of them wonderful fruit trees and wonderful vines, and some of them not so much. Okay? All kinds of things will break up. So Paul says, I'm a good farmer. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, Paul, Will commented earlier, I missed it, that he's in our life. I've never seen a burning bush, but I know he's there, and I agree with that, Will. So what's interesting is there's a time period I feel in our lives when I picture God like this. Picture God as a farmer walking over his land. And in the spring, I know it's only February, and maybe it's too early to talk about spring, but it's not that far off. So, it's winter, but just kind of bear with me. In the spring, when it's time to plant gardens and so forth, do any of you ever go out and actually look at the soil? Do you ever go out and look? You're not planting. You're not even starting to plant yet. But do you ever go out and walk over the space that will be tilled, that will be planted, that will be the garden? Yeah. Yeah, you go out and look and go, okay, we may need to clear away some debris from winter. We may need to do some things here. What part's there? Okay? And that's, yep, okay, so you'll know what I'm talking about, right? It's so rocky, I need more dirt, whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You ever reach down and actually feel the soil? That you want to see how wet it is in the spring? You go and you take it, and you take a clump and you squeeze it, and then you see whether or not it's going to fall apart in your hand, or whether it stays together as a clod. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Have you ever done that, where you actually put your hands into the soil and feel that cold dirt? It's still late winter, but you're trying, or maybe very early spring, but you're trying to see what the soil feels like. Well, I feel this is what God does in our lives. That God walks over and he's looking for places that are good to till. Maybe it's hard pack earth, but it can be turned over. Maybe there's, okay, this is an area that's here. No, this is still too wet. It's not ready yet. But he's walking over the fields and he's looking. Once God starts to till, it doesn't look like this anymore. It looks like this. This is much more dramatic. You all follow my point? This point is everybody can hear and smell and see and know that work is being done. You don't have, this is still a long way, but I often talk about this stage right here. This is the broken, disturbed earth, tilled earth stage, but I don't talk about this stage, going back a slide, which is God walking over your fields, God walking over the areas of your life to look and see where he will do this, which is to go and break up that earth in preparation for planting and then a harvest to come. And that gets me then to the question of the week. Where is God walking over your land to look for a place to till? Esther is a girl living in a village right now. She is just living her life. She has no clue what's going to happen in chapter 2. Do you understand? I mean, she's got no earthly idea what's about to happen. But God knows. And God is walking over and saying, this is about to get plowed up. I could plant Esther right there. And Esther is a girl who is planted with a purpose. There is no doubt that God put her in that place and that time to do exactly one specific thing. And we'll see in this book what it is that she has to do to save her people. So I would submit in your life, maybe it's not as dramatic as what Esther is going to do, although for you, maybe it is just as dramatic. But whatever it is, God is probably walking over your land right now. And he's looking to say, okay, what parts of each of you and me are ready to get tilled, to get turned over, to get plowed up? It's a destructive, traumatic experience when the fields get plowed up. If you're the one part of the field, if you follow my point, it's like, oh my gosh, my life changed. Yes, it did. Now, how can God use it? And that's, by the way, how I got to the voice of truth this morning, as I was thinking about that the voice of truth says, this is for my glory. Even when your whole life changes and things are different, look for and listen for that voice of truth that speaks to you during those times. So we get to see next week how Esther's life is very, very different than it was the chapter before. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord Heavenly Father, I thank you that you use us and that you do look for places to change us. Lord, it would be really easy just to say, just leave me the way I am. But that's not what I signed up for. When I came to be part of you, I knew that change would occur. I don't always like it. I don't always like change. But God, help me to be receptive to where you tell me change needs to occur to my life. Help me to know where it is that the hard pack earth needs to be turned over. And then give me the courage, Lord, to put that in your hands and trust that you will plant and reap a mighty harvest to your glory. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.